أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. I am your guest host Anas Azimi and welcome to season 2 episode 1 of the Pulse podcast. Inshallah, we have a great list of guests laid out for you for this season, and we have an even better list of topics laid out for you. So we're excited for this. So, without further ado, let me introduce our guest for today. Someone that I have been following for quite a long time, someone that I have looked up to for quite a long time now. Um, Someone that also collects books like their Pokemon and probably reads them faster than most of us read our mom's grocery list. We have Dr. Shoaib Ahmed Malik. Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Shoaib.
Wa alaikum salam. Hey Anas, thank you very much for inviting me to the show.
Of course, it's our pleasure. How are you doing, Dr. Shoaib?
Alhamdulillah, just on the recovering end of COVID, so that's why I'm still coughing. But apart from that, can't complain. Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. So before we get started with your presentation, could you give us a little bit of your background and why you chose the specific topic of evolution for your research?
Yeah, so my parents are from Pakistan, but I was born and raised in Kuwait for my whole life. So I was there until I was 18. And then after that, I went to the UK for 7 years for my studies. I specialized in chemistry and chemical engineering. So I was 3 years at University of Bath. I finished my undergraduate there. I taught my class, and I was awarded a full scholarship to go to the University of Nottingham for a PhD. Once I finished the PhD in chemical engineering, I realized it's something I don't want to do. So then that's when I started, seeking out other courses of studies in philosophy and Islamic sciences. And since then, I've tried, making ends through several different programs, studied with several different shuyukh. I did an MSc in philosophy of science of religion at Edinburgh. And I'm also currently lined up for an Alamiya program at Al Balagh. Meanwhile, while doing all of this, I'm a professor of physics, chemistry, and mathematics at a university in Dubai called Zayed University, and that's my day job. But my research is entirely in the field of Islam and science, atheism, and Islamic theology. That's been my shift since my engineering days.
Alhamdulillah. So why specifically evolution? Is there a personal significance, or did you just see a void in the academic sphere for Muslim Islam and evolution?
So when I left engineering, or rather when I made the conscious decision of leaving engineering, even though engineering has amazing professional opportunities for you in terms of finances and everything, I just couldn't see myself doing it every day. I remember sitting behind a computer crunching numbers, and I was thinking, I don't want to do this until I'm 60, 70, or 80. It just had no meaning to me. And so that's when I realized that, okay, maybe this is not my calling. When I started exploring, philosophy and theology in particular really, struck a chord with me, and tafsir as well. Those were, the three big ones. And I wanted to kind of see if I could still latch onto my scientific background, through some rudimentary way, and still go out and set forth explorations in philosophy and theology. Now, when I was doing my master's in science and religion, the program was entirely Christian centric because, all instructors were Christian. Most of the material was written by Christian instructors. So the Islamic perspectives on Islam and science are still developing, still young. One of the biggest things that kind of kept coming up, but I didn't feel there was a systematic discourse being laid out there, is the topic of Islam and evolution. Now, within Islam and science, there are many angles, right? You could look at quantum mechanics, artificial intelligence, bioethics, etc. But I would say Islam and evolution is one of the most heated conversations out there. And that's quite obvious even on my own Facebook whenever I get to talk to people, put some polls up there, and it's quite visible that people see this as a very sensitive or as a very engaging but polarizing issue. So what I wanted to do was just dedicate myself for the next 3, 4, 5 years to see if I could just come up with an exploration through a traditional scholar and see how evolution could work through an Islamic angle. And it was for me, I want it to be as thorough as possible, but yet accessible. Because one of the things I noticed about a lot of these materials is that they go over a lot of people's heads. So I wanted to really write a book that would make this conversation truly accessible to a wide audience. Will it be an absolute easy read? No, of course there are going to be some incremental build-ups as you go along the material, but the idea was to kind of really shape this discourse, provide some clarity, and along the way perhaps even offer some suggestions as to how this could be remedied. That's why in my own book, and inshallah I'll mention this in the presentation shortly, I don't offer any concrete conclusions. I offer possibilities for readers to take up on.
Okay. And from a more of a public question is, why should the public and why should we care about evolution? Why is this something that we should spend time reading a book? And I believe your book is pretty big, pretty big, 250 plus pages. Why should we
300.
spend the time reading
Right.
these materials?
So I think for me, one of the biggest reasons why people should invest in a topic like Islam and evolution. So there's a couple of different angles here. Number one, and I've experienced this myself. I know actually two cases right now. There are people who have left Islam because of points like evolution. It may not be the only point, but it's definitely been a point that has come up in the conversion process. I know two families who are currently in this situation right now. When I used to be a khatib at Nottingham, I remember I used to have parents call me up because their son left for evolution. So it's something that is visibly affecting the youth. Number two, Islam and evolution is also an opportunity for parents to understand how important it is not to just put your child in a school and think that that's their Islamic studies done. What I wanted to do was showcase very clearly that if you adopt a particular theological school, it shows the importance of creed in doing an analysis like this. So my hope is that parents in particular might be able to pick this book up and see that creed or your theology is not something that you should be leaving to the sides to collect dust. It is something that should be inculcated, instilled to students at a young age, and then developed up much more critically. Well, the problem that we have is when we resort to just a few people to giving us all the answers, imams may not have all the answers to such things, and that's okay. It's okay to say I don't have the answers, but the problem here is that when parents rely on that kind of strategy, you begin to see a drifting of students. Because I mean, let's face it, today most of our kids are facing science in the university or the high school institutions much more than they are facing the Islamic sciences. I mean, the average layman, besides knowing the few quls here and there, won't know more than that, right? So, and that's a key problem. So I wanted to show how you can take your tradition very seriously and engage with a contemporary question, so that you can see that what you are being taught at madrasas, if you take it to a really high level, you can kind of directly challenge any contemporary issue that's coming your way. And I think primarily for these two reasons, to tackle atheism, or one of the growing concerns for atheism, as well as empowerment for Muslims, particularly parents, but I think Muslims in general, to really give them the tools and the facilitation to address a question like Islam and evolution.
To give a personal anecdote, I went to American high school for 1 year over here, and my biology teacher actually was going over evolution, and he asked, as a poll in the class, he asked everyone that believed in evolution, raise your hands. And almost all the class raised their hands. And back then, I hadn't really researched and I didn't really know anything, so I didn't raise my hand for either question. And then he said, okay, put your hands down. Everyone else that's wrong, raise your hand. So it's pushed as an idea that is just seen as completely true. And because our Muslim ummah has developed a knee-jerk reaction to evolution, I was confused for a week or two. And then I started looking into it. I came across you, and alhamdulillah, ever since then, I've spent a lot of time on this topic. So why do you think
When was this? How long was this, Anas?
This was 2.5 years ago, I think.
Wow. Okay.
2017.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Why do you think our ummah has developed this sort of knee-jerk reaction where anything about evolution or anything related to evolution is suddenly a no-no?
I think there are a couple of different reasons here, historical, as well as just sociological. So when evolution entered, I'm talking mostly the Middle Eastern region, um, you have to bear in mind that a lot of this information came through Christian Jesuit schools, which were institutionalized in the Arab world. And when that happened, it came with the Christian baggage. So a lot of these ideas that were coming over came with these Christian problems that they were having with the theory of evolution. Now, bear in mind, Muslims and Christians have, of course, similar theological systems, but they're also fundamentally different. And so a lot of their sensitivity is not something that we share. To give you one brief example, Christians, there's a movement called Young Earth Creationism. They believe that the Earth is literally around 6 to 10,000 years old because of certain biblical references. Muslims don't have any kind of problem like that. So there's not a concern that we should
One
be
second,
worried
Dr.
about.
Shoaib, but it seems like your mic is having some issues. If you could maybe unplug
Can
in.
you hear me now?
Much better now. Sorry
Yeah.
about that.
So no worries. So I was saying that there are some issues in the Christian context that are hardly issues in the Muslim world. So we have to be careful in that when we see an issue with evolution, we have to see how did it become an issue in the Muslim context. And a lot of this happened because of this migration movement. When evolution was making its way into the Muslim world, particularly the Middle East, it came through a lot of Christian filters and contexts. And they eventually started becoming Muslim issues. Now, much more recently, the person who has really amplified this divide between Islam and evolution is Harun Yahya. He took a lot of the creationist literature written by creationist movements and think tanks like the ID crowd, and taken their narrative and published thousands of books, in English, in Turkish, and several other languages. And he, famously, almost single-handedly, made evolution like an idea that it's equal to atheism, it's equal to naturalism, it's a hocus pocus theory, it's a theory of the devil, it leads to fascism, leads to all kinds of isms out there. And that has kind of sunk into the Muslim mind. And I think that this is a major problem because what it shows is that there was a vacuum there, and somebody just filled that vacuum by just copying creationist literature, and that has become our default standpoint of the whole conversation. So I wanted to move away from these simplistic scenarios, and even now, people who were promoting Harun Yahya a couple of decades ago are now against Harun Yahya. So we do see shifting of opinions. But unfortunately, in the Muslim world, evolution still remains a thorny topic because of these connotations attached with the theory: naturalism, atheism, etc., etc. And one of the things that I wanted to achieve in my book was to disentangle what evolution is as a theory versus the philosophical constructs that have been overlaid on it by people like Harun Yahya and creationists.
Right, Jazakallah khair for that. And I will let you begin your presentation.
All right, thank you very much. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. So once again, I'd like to thank Uplift Dawah for inviting me to this podcast. It's an absolute honor to share just even a glimpse and overview of my work on Islam and evolution. So I recently wrote a book called Islam and Evolution, Al-Ghazali and the Modern Evolutionary Paradigm. And this is open access, which means you can download it for free no matter where you are in the world. Very, very luckily and thankfully, a really good friend of mine said that this should not have a high price tag because unfortunately Routledge does charge a lot per piece. So that person paid Routledge to make the book open access, so no one has to pay a dime for it anymore. So yeah, it's available free. You can search for it. You'll find it everywhere on Google. You can even find it on my YouTube page, inshallah. So that's that. Now today, what I want to do is cover a few basic things. What is the rationale of the book? Quickly go over the science of evolution, and then just highlight very briefly what are some of the issues, the Islamic problems when it comes to evolution. I'll then give an overview of my book, and then most importantly, I will talk about the different positions, and then the Ghazalian evaluation, right? So this will be, hopefully, at least I can pray that it'll help you guys in terms of navigating the discussion as clearly as possible, inshallah. So the rationale of the book. So when we as Muslims, when we have a question about haram and halal, we have to go to a faqih, right? A faqih is somebody who has expertise in terms of looking at the scriptural sources of Islam and deriving fatwas. Yeah. Now, similarly here, when we want to say that there's a problem with an idea, if you want to say that it's kufr or it's bid'ah, it warrants the charge of you leaving the fold of Islam, it's no longer a fiqh, well, it can be a fiqh question, but it comes primarily under a theological territory, a creedal point of view, right? Because creed is what tells you what you can and cannot believe in Islamically. And so that is the framework through which you must filter your ideas by. Now, we have two broad camps in Islam. So we have Sunnis and then we have Shi'as, right? Within the Sunni school, there are three main camps. There's the Ash'ari school, there's the Maturidi school, and then there's the Athari school. All of these are Sunni schools, right? Of course, they have their respective differences between them, sometimes major, sometimes minor, but these are all Sunni schools of Islam. The particular school that I chose for this work is the Ash'ari school, and the main representative that I focused in on was Al-Ghazali. The reason why I did that was because Al-Ghazali is one of the most celebrated scholars in the Muslim world. And he's written several different works on Sufism, on Aqidah, on Usul Fiqh, etc. And so I just wanted to dive deep into his corpus and really try to extract a methodology through which I could then look at a conversation like Islam and evolution. And then that's one of the reasons why I focused on Ghazali and the Ash'ari school. What I want to be clear about is that this is not simply, okay, I've taken Ghazali and I just blindly apply him. There are a lot of interesting new ideas that have developed in the current conversation in philosophy of science and religion. And so what I've done is I've taken some of them that's because they can easily be integrated in the Ash'ari perspective. And so that's what I try to do. It's a work of constructive theology that'll hopefully give, shed some light on how to, handle some of the conversations coming out of evolution. The final thing that I wanted to mention was, and I know some people may not like the strategy, but I took the science as a given, right? I know that many people do not want to take the science as a given in any shape or form. They want to question the science, they want to critique the science, they want to, challenge its basic assumptions, whatever have you. For me, I didn't want to do that, right? I didn't want to do any of that because, and here's my personal philosophy, when you want to challenge the science, right, you are challenging an entire disciplinary economy. And I think to do that, you must be a specialist in the field to be able to do that. And I just felt that a safer route, a much more robust route is, okay, take the science. Take the science fully as you want it, no problem, right? How much of this package of evolution, when you filter it through your creedal perspective, how much of it can it be accepted? That's all I want to do. And this gives you a much more robust foundation. So regardless whether you believe in evolution or not, at least all the maximum parameters are being highlighted for you. And that is my main focus, is what exactly can you accept? What exactly can you reject? And that was the reason why I didn't really question the science in any shape or form. I just said, take it as it is, and we'll see how far we can embrace it. And that's my personal reasoning for doing it this way, because it gives you a robust answer. So whether you believe in evolution or not makes no difference. Even if you did believe in it, this is at least the furthest you can take it up within the Ash'ari paradigm. So that's the rationale of the book. Now, before I go into the conversation about the specifics, I just thought I should briefly cover the signs of evolution, because I think many people have different or sometimes distorted ideas about what evolution may mean. So here you can see it's just three basic propositions. The first proposition is known as deep time, and this simply means that the Earth is much, much older than we anticipated. It's not a few 10,000 years, it's actually billions of years, So Earth is 4.6 billion years old. Our first specimens of life started about 3.6 billion years ago. And so deep time is a requirement for evolutionary processes to come about. The next one is called common ancestry. So again, very simple proposition, nothing too difficult. Me, you, all of us, we have mothers and fathers. They have mothers and fathers, and they have mothers and fathers, and they have mothers and fathers. And as we keep going back, we begin to develop this family tree, right? We begin to see these branches, the different lineages coming out. So evolution just takes that one stage further. Rather than talking about individuals, it says all of these species that we see, these all fit onto a biohistorical lineage. So that means humans did not just pop into existence. Humans actually came from a prior species. There are many different tree networks that you can develop. But the picture on the right hand side, that will show you that in this family-like network, that humans they have a networking relationship with chimpanzees, with gorillas. Not that we come from chimpanzees or gorillas. That's not what evolution says. They're more like our distant cousins, that we have a common ancestor with them. And this is, I think, one of the biggest issues that Muslims have, because it really conflicts with the scriptural account of things. So that is an issue that I think most Muslims have problems with. The third one are the mechanics of evolution. So now that we know deep time and we know this family-like network is happening through common ancestry, how does evolution actually occur? So this is where neo-Darwinism comes in. So neo-Darwinism states that the mechanics of evolution rest on two basic principles. The first one is called natural selection. And again, this is very easy. It just means that when you have a species and you put them into a particular locality, they will begin adapting to the locality. So for example, if I have 100 species and they have different ranges of fur on them, some have very thick fur, some have very thin fur, I put all of them to the in the Sahara Desert. And the Sahara Desert, it's incredibly hot. And any animal which has thick fur will likely not survive. So eventually what we'll see is species with thick fur will eventually die out. And the ones that have thin fur are better suited to living in that climate. So that's a form of natural selection, that environment selects which species is most likely to survive in that particular environment. So it's just basic, mechanics, that if you have a given environment, given its variables, which species can survive and adapt according to that particular context. And then random mutation is simply this idea that all of us, we have these biological units called DNA. And through successive reproduction patterns, we sometimes get mutations in our DNA. And that can change in who we are physically. So there's a gene in you responsible for your hair. There's a gene responsible for your height. There's a gene responsible for your eye color, for your skin texture. All of these have correlations that map down to your genes. So your genes really are your blueprint. And if you change the gene, you can change the physicality of you. Now, what evolution says that over successive periods of time, long periods of time, we're talking about 3.5 billion years, you can have so many accumulated changes that you begin to see speciation. And that's where we begin to see these different animals and plants coming out through the process. So when we're talking about evolution, it is the conjunction of these three things. Deep time, common ancestry, and the mechanics are two things: natural selection and random mutation. Anis, was that okay, or do you want me to move on? Because I'll take your cue for it.
Yeah, I think I'll ask you one question which I had received from someone who reached out to me.
Sure.
They said, if evolution is true, and this is more of a scientific question. I know we're taking science as a given, but it's a very layman question, so I'm sure you can answer it. If it is true, why don't we see pre-Homo sapien hominids, and why don't we see monkeys evolving into humans as we live right now?
Right. Okay. So the first question, pre-hominid. So we do have those fossils. We actually have those fossils in place. If you just do a very basic research, you'll be able to see that there are, Neanderthals, there's Denisovans, there's Homo erectus. They have very similar physical features to us. So those things exist. They don't not exist. So those are there.
I think their question is more about, why don't we see these Neanderthals walking among us if evolution is a constant process?
Oh, right. So I think when it comes to why these other hominin lines don't exist, what we can tell so far is that humans and so us and them used to be on war. So they eventually died out. That's the current
Mhm.
narrative that's going on. So we had there were three main ones, right? So there was Homo erectus, there was Denisovans, there was Neanderthal. They were apparent they interbred, so there was intermarriage going on, but there was also a warfare going on. But the current theory seems to be that they must have died out because of these reasons. Of course, these are still under development, but that's the main, line of research that I've read so far. That there was a lot of warfare between these entities. And what was the second question, Anas?
Um, I'm not sure. I'm sorry, I forgot.
Oh, no worries, no worries. Okay,
All
so
right.
Anas, you want to say something?
No, I think you can go on now.
Okay, right. So this is the science of evolution, right? Now, there are a couple of problems that Muslims have with evolution, given what I have just said. So the first one, as I said, is common ancestry. It clearly violates the Quran. So we know that Adam and Eve were, they were created in heaven. At least from the scriptural record, that's what we find out. We know that they fell from heaven because of the mistake of Adam, because of Satan, Iblis, and we know that humanity sprang forth from there. This seems to defy what evolution tells us. Number two, we people see it as a naturalistic theory or an atheistic theory. Number three, people cannot understand how a theory like evolution can work through randomness. How can all this exist through randomness? It just doesn't make sense. Number four, intelligent design. So I'd say the biggest contention that most Muslims have when it comes to seeing evolution as a valid proposal, they think that because it's intrinsically atheistic or it's intrinsically naturalistic, they think a better explanation of this is intelligent design. And the ID crowd is well known in the Christian circle. So people like William Behe, William Dembski, Michael Behe, they are well-known proponents of the intelligent design movement. And then finally, you have issues of morality. If all of us are products of evolution, then morality is out of the equation because morality is a product of our brain, and our brains are products of evolution. So if you rewind the tape of life, it's possible that our moral structures would not exist today. Maybe we might have different moral frameworks. So our morality is contingent. There is no such thing as objective morality. So all of these contentions really rile up a lot of Muslims. Anas, did you want to say something, or shall I move on?
I think you can keep going.
Okay, right, cool. So this is the overview of my book, and I'll just quickly explain the structure so that if you do go on to read it, you can at least have some blueprint to it. So the book has 4 parts to it. Part 1 is called Setting the Context, and there are 2 chapters in this. In the first chapter, I just talk about what evolution is, just as a scientific theory. And what I try and do in this chapter is explain the scientific principles. It requires no background in biology, so even if you've never studied bio, you can still understand the chapter. It's written in lay terms. And then it also goes to the history of evolution, because many people think that Charles Darwin was an atheist. He came up with this theory because he wanted to bring atheism to the fore, and etc. So I go through the history very clearly to kind of remove any misconceptions. And then at the end of the first chapter, I go through 9 objections. For example, evolution isn't falsifiable, evolution is naturalistic, and all of those main concerns. So I put it all out there in the first chapter. The second chapter is a review of Christian responses to evolution. The reason why I did this is because I wanted to show Muslim readers in particular that evolution was born in a Christian context and it had Christian concerns. As a result of these concerns, this is how they reacted to the theory. Now, if we have this in place, we can then see what we share with Christians, but also where we differ to Christians. And so that's why chapter 2 is very important. It sets the context to see exactly where and how Muslim responses might agree, but also where we might disagree. So that's part 1 of the book. Part 2 of the book are Islamic perspectives on evolution. So in chapter 3, it's just me going over the standard narrative that we find in the Quran. So I just extract all the verses, all the ahadith related to the creation narrative of creation of the universe, creation of animals, creation of Adam, humans, etc. And it's just to give you an overview. And this is the traditional narrative. Like, what have Muslims traditionally believed in for the past 1400 years? That's what chapter 3 goes over. That's the function of chapter 3. Chapter 4 is an exhaustive chapter. Here I go over 20 different opinions on Islam and evolution. And I come up with my own taxonomy here, like my own classification, which we'll get to later. And then I put them into this taxonomy, and I show exactly how and where they agree with or disagree with evolution. Finally, in chapter 5, this is a historical chapter. So there's a movement, or rather there's a growing idea that Muslims in the past, like Ibn Khaldun, Rumi, Ikhwan al-Safa, they were talking about evolution. And what I try and do and show is that these people are relying on truncated texts or paragraphs from these old scholars. They were not talking about evolution. Now, the reason why some people want to do that is because they want to show, well, if our previous scholars accepted evolution, why can't we now? But this is false history. They were not talking about evolution. They were resorting to something called the Great Chain of Being. And I clarify what that is in this chapter here. So the first 2 parts of the book, part 1 and part 2, are largely descriptive. It's just kind of showing the field to you. Part 3 and part 4 is the constructive part. This is where I start developing the thesis from an Ash'ari perspective. So in part 3 of this entire book, these are metaphysical considerations. As if you can see there, I talk about things like naturalism, chance, inefficiency, the idea of intelligent design, and morality and evolution. How do all of these things play out in an Ash'ari paradigm? This is what I address in this part. These are very philosophically loaded. Not that they're difficult to read, but they're philosophically loaded. So you need to be patient with reading these chapters. But if you understand these chapters, at least in terms of all of these issues, they get clarified, they go away for you. Part 4 is the scriptural stuff. So now, because Imam Ghazali did not have, or rather we don't have any remaining work of his where he does exegesis, tafsir work, what I had to do was I had to extract his hermeneutic framework, his exegetical framework, his usul, out of his corpus. And that's what I do in chapter 9. I try to show his understanding between reason and revelation, scripture and natural sciences. When is something too far of an interpretation? When is something a valid interpretation? When should you read something metaphorically? All of those things and considerations I put in there. Once that's done in chapter 9, I then take that framework and apply it on all of the opinions that we saw in chapter 4, those 20 different perspectives. And then I reach the conclusion of my book. So this is the overview, that the first 2 chapters are descriptive. It kind of gives you the map of the field. And then the next 2 chapters are the constructive part. This is what you can accept. This is what you cannot accept in terms of the Ash'ari paradigm. So that's that. Yeah, Anas, do you want me to move on, or?
Yeah, you can keep going.
Okay, so these are the different positions that I developed in the course of my writing this book. So there are 4 positions here. So creationism is simply this idea that God created every single species instantaneously. So there was no evolution whatsoever. So you can see nothing is a product of evolution. Everything is rejected to being a part of evolution. So that's clear-cut creationism. By contrast, evolution, no exceptions, is the complete opposite. This is the camp that believes everything is a product of evolution. So humans, non-humans, even Adam must have had a mother and father. This is what this camp believes in, right? So these 2 extremes should be made clear. In between these 2, we have a position known as human exceptionism. Human exceptionism is this idea that non-humans, so animals and plants, could be products of evolution, but humans are definitely not. And this is the position of, for example, Yasser Qadi and Sheikh Nu Keller, for instance. And then Adamic exceptionism, and this is the new position that I think people will first struggle with, but it's a position that's developed by that's an extension of David's ideas, David Solomon Jalajal. This is a position known as Adamic exceptionism, which is the idea here that non-humans are a product of evolution, but also humans. Now, what do I mean by that? His thesis is that we should adopt something called tawaqquf. Tawaqquf is this idea that when you do not have anything mentioned in the Quran or the Hadith, you be quiet about it. You cannot say anything about it. So for instance, Anas, let me ask you, do you have any religious obligation to believe in dinosaurs? Any religious obligation?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Okay. Do you have any religious obligation to negate dinosaurs, to disbelieve in dinosaurs? No, because Islamic scripture makes no case either for or against. So either way, whatever you want to do is up to you, but it's not a religious issue, right? The same way here, the narrative that David is saying, that Adam and Eve, right, they were created in heaven miraculously, they fell down, but Quran and Hadith are completely silent on there being these close, physically similar human beings to us. And as a result of that, when Adam and Eve had kids, when their kids happened, Quran and Hadith are silent on the fact that their kids and these other humans that could have been created through evolutionary processes could have mingled with one another. And so that's why he takes Adam and Eve as being excluded from the process of evolution. They're excluded from the theory of evolution because they're miraculous creations. But Adam and Eve's descendants could have mingled with these. Thus, there's a lineage that traces back to Adam and Eve, which exactly what Scripture tells us, that all of us are children of Adam and Eve. No exception. Me, you, the average person on the street, we are all kids of Adam and Eve. But there's nothing problematic with stating that perhaps in the middle of the chain, there were some mixings going on, and that also explains how some human beings have Neanderthal blood in them, or had genes in them, or Denisovan genes in them. So this is what David's thesis extends to, that we can believe in human evolution, but we still have to maintain that Adam and Eve are miraculous creations, because Scripture is very clear about Adam and Eve's status. Now, just to be clear, in case some sisters get upset why I did not include Eve's name in here, so it should be Adam and Eve exceptionism. I just want to be clear here, it was just for convenience. When I say Adamic exceptionism, it includes Adam and Eve. I just didn't want to use like a conjunction like Adivic. People will not know what that is, so I just said, let me just keep it Adamic. But I mean in here Adam and Eve. So this was just out of convenience, no non-inclusivity issues there. So that's that. I think there's some photos. Yeah. So so just to give you better precision about some of these ideas, the main diagram you should be looking at is the right-hand side. So over a period of the last 2 million years, if you look at the right-hand side diagram, you can see Homo heidelbergensis. It splits up into 3 different chains: Denisovans, Neanderthals, and you've got pre-sapiens. Now, according to human exceptionism, which is Sheikh Yasser Qadi's thesis, that Adam popped into existence. So you can see that white little dot there, and then from there, all humans sprang forth. And that's his thesis, that humans as a species as a whole, are excluded from the process. Now, this is different to Adamic exceptionism. This is Adamic exceptionism. Here, you can see 3 different dots now. Since we have no clue when Adam was born, in Islamic corpus, we have 0 clue. We have nothing authentic whatsoever about when Adam was born. Could have been 10,000, 20,000, 30,000, 100,000, 200,000. We have 0 clue. 0 clue. So he could have been born, before Heidelbergensis, after Heidelbergensis, and because you've got to bear in mind that these are scientific categories. They could still fit under the understanding of insan, right? They could still fit understanding of the sand, which is a religious category. So the point here is that regardless of which position you take, Adam is the isolated miracle, but Adam's descendants could have married and therefore have these interlineages with other entities. Now, these are not necessarily other species that therefore they committed bestiality, or that's because that's what some people say. That's not the case. In order for this to work, they must be physically and genetically and physiologically very similar to us. You cannot reproduce with entities that are different to you. It's impossible. What we're simply saying under Adamic exceptionism is that Quran and Hadith are silent on there being entities that share similar physiological and biological structures to us, and therefore, because it's silent, they could or could not have existed. And because those possibilities are there, Adam's descendants could have married with these other entities there. Remember, Allah, we don't know what His Sharia was. Allah could have allowed that, permitted that. We don't know. We do not know. So that possibility could have been there. And so Adam's kids could have married, and therefore there could have been lineages that lead up to us today. This way, all of us trace back to Adam and Eve, but also we have a lineage that goes back to the origins of life. So these are the two diagrams that hopefully clarifies the distinction between the two. Now, if you take Imam Ghazali's framework, how far can you go? How far can you go? There are two questions here: metaphysically possible and scripturally possible. So let me explain what I mean by what is metaphysically possible. This is simply the idea, can God do it this way? Can God, if He wanted to do it this way, can God create us through creationism? Yes. If Allah wanted to, He could have created us through creationism, no problem. He is, He's Al-Qadir. He can do whatever He wants. Can God create us through human exceptionism? Yes. Can God create us through Adamic exceptions? Of course. Can God create us through no exceptions? So could He have created Adam without a mother, with a mother and father? Yes, if He wanted to. He could have done it. But He's in total control. All of these are completely possible. And the reason why I want to highlight this is because people say evolution is atheistic. God can do it if He wanted to. God could have done any of these possibilities, right? Now, so this needs to be made clear that Allah's power allows Him to do any of these options. We believe in an omnipotent God. We don't believe in a limited God. So all of these are possible. Now then, what is scripturally compatible? Now here, I want to make sure that this is clear. When I say it's possible, I mean it's compatible. Is creationism compatible with Islam, with Islamic scripture? Yes. If you want, you can read creationism into it if you wanted to. Is human exceptionism compatible with the Quran? Yes. You could read it if you want, because there's no clear verses about animals and plants in terms of their creation. You could read them very, very ambiguously. Is Adamic exceptionism compatible? Yes. That is what David's thesis is, that you could believe in that. But is no exceptions compatible? No. Because Adam and Eve's miraculous creation are apparent, and Ghazali has no problem with believing in miracles. Most of the people in the no exceptions camp, they don't believe in miracles. They believe that everything must have a scientific explanation, which is not something that necessarily Ghazali espouses. The whole point of a miracle is that it transcends scientific explanation. It goes beyond a scientific explanation. So that is where the red line would be. But as you can see here, I'm not saying which one is correct. That is up to you. So if you disbelieve in evolution, go ahead, be a creationist. It's fine. Islamically, that's fine. If you believe in evolution and you want to, take it to a maximum thesis, human exceptionism and Adamic exceptionism are your positions to go forward with. And that is it. And the point is, at the end of the day, my idea was to kind of remove any friction between the two camps. Both of them are theologically acceptable. Both of them are theologically acceptable as long as they fit under one of these three positions. And that's it. So at the end of the day, whether you believe in evolution or not, it now is a secondary scientific contention, whether it convinces you or not as a Muslim. But as a Muslim, these possibilities are there for you. And that's what I concluded at the end of my investigation. So, I mean, thanks for listening to me. If you have any questions, you can feel free to email me. But yeah, that's my presentation and a glimpse of my book. Over to you, Anas.
Thank you for that, Dr. Shoaib. So to oversimplify again, if you could go back to the last slide,
Yeah.
and please correct me if I'm wrong, but creationism is the view that every single thing was created specially by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and evolution as a paradigm doesn't really exist.
Yes.
And then human exceptionalism is the belief that humans are a special creation, but everything else could have been a part of evolution.
Yeah.
And Adamic exceptionalism is just that Adam and Eve were the only special creations, and humans, or humans in double quotes, could have been part of evolution.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Alhamdulillah. And then
so you know how,
reading,
just for Adamic exceptionalism, I could explain this another way. So you know how we believe that Musa alayhi salam, he took his stick and the seas split and raised the skies, right? So and allowed people to walk through. We believe in that exception, that Allah defied the laws of gravity. We believe in that exception, but we also don't disbelieve in gravity. We just believe that that was an exception to the mechanics of gravity. Same way here. You believe in evolution, but then you say that Adam and Eve are the exceptions to the process. That's it. That's the same line of reasoning here.
So another question that's often brought up is that when you say that evolution is possible, what do you say about the aspect of randomness in evolution? Are you saying that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala just let things be random and he doesn't have control over it?
Right. So this question about evolution has big concerns, and I think mostly comes down to because people do not study theology. There was a big hoo-ha about this when Sheikh Hamza Yusuf said that it's okay for God to do it this way, and people just criticized him so badly because they did not understand what he was saying. So Anas, let's start off with a basic example. Have you ever played coin tosses?
I have, yeah.
Have you ever played games with dice? Astaghfirullah. So when you roll the dice, right? Did you know what was going to come out?
No.
No. So when you roll a 6, when you needed a 6, that's a chance move, right? It's completely chance, right? Does Allah not exist at that moment?
He does.
He does. Does Allah not know which dice is going to come out?
He does.
He does. So what is not apparent to us, or what is not predictable by us, He still knows, correct?
Yeah.
Yep. So chance is just a mask of our ignorance of a situation where we cannot explain the outcome or predict the outcome with precision. Same way here, when we're talking about chance in evolution, these mutations occur throughout the history of life. And there are a range of explanations, but we just as in humans, do not know when exactly which mutation occurred and what caused it, because one mutation can have several causes. It could be a mutation because of X-rays. It could be mutation because of copying error or gene problems or whatever have you. But I cannot say at exactly 10:35 a.m. 1.7 million years ago, this particular animal had this particular mutation. We don't know those specifics. Does that mean Allah doesn't know those specifics?
No.
No, right? So just because evolution works through random processes does not mean that it is random for God. Randomness is something that we see, and we use equations to give us probabilities, to say that, okay, maybe 50% this time, 50% that time, 30%, 70%, whatever have you. But Allah is huwa ala kulli shayin qadir. He is controlling absolutely everything. Whether it appears random to us or not makes no difference. He is still in control, he still knows everything, and he's still coordinating everything. So people need to be very clear about this, that the physical space that we live in can have probable or random components to it, but Allah is always in control. That's the key thing. He is never out of that loophole. To believe otherwise is to believe in a God that is limited or weak. We don't believe in that kind of God. We believe in a God that knows everything and controls everything all the time.
All right, and for my last question is, it's a bit of a curveball, and you can choose not to answer it if you'd like. But you mentioned that you are looking at evolution from an Ash'ari and from the perspective of what Imam Ghazali would probably do. So, do you have an opinion, or could you say what it would be like from the other theological schools, possibly from an Athari perspective or Maturidi perspective? Or if not, do you have any resources that you could guide us to so that we can go and read or watch lectures in order to determine what these other perspectives would say?
So I've actually mentioned this before, and I'll say it again, that I have no problem. I encourage people who adopt those paradigms to do the same kind of thing that I did for evolution through the Ash'ari lens. In fact, I'm more than happy to even supervise people who want to take these research lines up. What I can guess for the Maturidi perspective is they will differ with Ash'aris, and they will differ with Ash'aris on a few things: the morality question, and also the idea of randomness. That God doesn't do things through random processes. There may be something we just don't know the full mechanics of it yet. But Ash'aris, but this is because of well-known differences between Ash'aris and the Maturidi schools of thought. So there might be some differences there in the morality side and the random side. So just to give you a clue, Ash'aris do not believe in objective morality. They don't believe in objective morality. When I say this to people, it shocks people that we don't have objective morality. They don't believe it. They say whatever Allah wills, that is what is good and bad. Whatever Allah says is evil, that it becomes evil. Whatever Allah says is good, that becomes good. So in another moral framework, if Allah wanted to, He could have made killing a good thing. He could have done it. He could have willed it that way. And Ash'aris have no problem with that because they believe in this position. Maturidis will differ. They'll say that no, Allah has given us reasons, Allah has given some faculty to determine good and bad. So there are objective moral, and this is a well-known difference between these two schools. So there will be some differences there. In terms of the hermeneutics, however, the scriptural stuff, this I feel will be similar. I think these will be similar because the principle of tawaqquf that David is advocating is a principle that is applicable to both schools, the Maturidis and the Atharis. So scripturally speaking, those possibilities should be retained unless there are reasons to reject Adamic exceptionism, but I think that they would be the same. So that's why I wrote this book with those opinions so that people can dissect and think about these things. But I'd say it's mostly the metaphysics that they would disagree upon and less on the scriptural stuff. This would be my guess.
Okay. All right, Jazakallah khairan, Dr. Shoaib, for that wonderful presentation. We wish to see you in Seattle in person, maybe at our masajids at our MSAs giving presentations in the near future once things open
Inshallah.
up, inshallah. A reminder to everyone to keep both of us in your du'as. Dr. Shoaib is recovering from COVID, so please do keep him in your special du'as as well. Also, there was a du'a request by Dr. Shoaib for his friend who made his book open access. And to finish off, I'm just going to link Dr. Shoaib's YouTube channel, or it's actually the Fatima Elizabeth Institute of Islam Science and Philosophy, which Dr. Shoaib heads. It's their YouTube channel where Dr. Shoaib holds a lot of interviews and shows and podcasts with other academics. And over there as well, he has held interviews with Dr. Yasir Qadi and Dr. David Solomon Jalajal, who come at this from a different perspective and might reach different conclusions. So I would recommend that everyone does go watch it. I have dropped the link to his YouTube channel in the comments. And also, he has a multitude of videos on his channel covering a multitude of topics relating to Islam, science, and philosophy. So I would recommend people do that. There are multiple links in the chat. One is to Dr. Shoaib's book, Open Access. It's to his YouTube channel. I would also ask people to follow him on Facebook and social medias if you want to follow his work, since he works on countless projects at the same time. And that's about it. Jazakallah khairan, Dr. Shoaib, and Jazakallah khairan, everyone, for streaming in.
Barakallah fiqh. Thank you so much.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Right before COVID-19 pandemic hit, we asked you to help us take da'wah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to the next level. Your support that day was our mandate. And ever since then, we have not stopped. We are proud to inform you that not only did we accomplish what we set out to do, but we exceeded all of our
Sorry, Dr. Shoaib, I'm not
February
sure
of
why
last
this
year,
started.
we lacked an official da'wah
But
location. But thanks
can
to
I
you, our
switch
new
it off
office has
somehow?
allowed us to centralize da'wah here.
Sorry about that, little technical issues. But again, Jazakallah khair, Dr. Shoaib, do you have anything to say before we sign off?
No, I just want to say, get in touch if you have any questions or follow-ups. I hope that, today's presentation and session benefited all of you, and all good that came from this is from Allah. All mistakes are my own. Thank you.
Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum.